While all eyes are on UConn after the Huskies became back-to-back national champions, the faculty union says they need more state support to stay winning on campus and in the classroom. With a $96 million shortfall in cuts already being made, we're talking to them about what's at stake and what they say it'll take. But first, with this session close to its close, but still so much more to do, we're touching base with the co-chair of the Judiciary Committee, the fight to make Connecticut's court system fair and transparent, plus criminal justice proposals and police reform. We're talking all that and more in this morning's Committee Close-Up. Good morning and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. Less than a month until the legislative deadline, this short session finishing May 8th. As lawmakers get busy with bills, we're continuing to break them down for you. In today's committee close-up, we're talking all things judiciary with co-chair of that committee, State Representative Stephen Stafstrom. Representative, thank you so much for being here with us.
Good morning, Emma. Thanks for having me.
So some of the things the committee took up this session, whether it's fertility fraud or regulating newer technologies like artificial intelligence, we hear sometimes from viewers and constituents, the question they keep bringing up is, wait, that's not already illegal here in Connecticut? We obviously live in a changing world. How much of this, the past few months here, has been focused on creating laws for some of these new challenges?
Yeah, I think every year we see that in the Judiciary Committee, where our criminal justice code is always evolving, it's always changing, and it's always trying to keep up with technology, whether that's advances in the internet or last session, obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about how to tighten up our gun regulations based on new technology we've seen there. Criminal justice is not a static issue. There are certain crimes and certain things that have happened for eons, eternity. Certainly someone breaking into someone's house or simple theft have always been occurring. But there are new threats and new crimes, and we are always trying to keep up with it.
And a lot of that, too, is sort of filling in the gaps in state law. And sometimes that comes from testimony, emails, and calls of concern to your offices. One of your constituents, a Bridgeport teacher and grandma, was facing eviction recently, and her story actually inspired specific reform, which you brought to the committee, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we saw really a horrible situation come out of Bridgeport earlier this year, where a woman who had turned out well over $100,000 in equity in her home lost her home over an $8,000 credit card debt. I think it was a shocking story. Certainly something that I don't think happens frequently or often in our court, but once is too often. And Connecticut really is a leader nationally in terms of when someone is facing foreclosure out of their homes. And generally that's because someone has missed a couple mortgage payments. Our court system really works to try to mediate a dispute between the bank and the property owner. Try to get the person back to a process where they can make catch-up payments and stay in their home and pay down the debt that they owe on their mortgage. We didn't have that same process with what's called consumer debt or credit card debt. And therefore, that's what led to really this tragic story in Bridgeport. And we're working to close that gap in our statutes.
And that's really, I think, a powerful example of testimony and talking to lawmakers, how that can really, make a difference. We hear from many lawmakers we talk to that, they say they read everyone's testimony and it does influence their decisions. With that in mind, for you as chair of this committee, there have been a lot of packed public hearings this session, really long hours. What are one or two of the discussions or constituent concerns that have really stood out to you this session?
So I think you highlighted, obviously, that one was really impactful. I think certainly coming from Bridgeport and what happened this past fall in the elections, one of the gaps we're trying to fill this year is to extend the time that prosecutors have in order to bring election-related charges. Sometimes we see or we hear allegations of election-related conduct that may rise to a criminal level, and by the time it's fully investigated, the so-called statute of limitations or ability to bring a charge has run. Another instance we've seen that in recently was the scandal coming out of last year with the state police and the traffic ticket issue. And we saw there, again, that there wasn't sufficient protections built into our law to prevent that from happening or to prosecute for violations of what should be illegal conduct. And so, those are all gaps in our statutes that we're looking to close this year.
And when it comes to Connecticut's police, there is a lot of distrust from the community. And you mentioned the ticket scandal, some people in different communities saying there was distrust even before then, but obviously now a lot after. We also know recruitment and retention are major problems for law enforcement. What are some of the committee bills moving forward? And do you think any of them have a good chance on the floor this session?
Sure. So we know recruitment of police officers, and I would add correction officers as well, is a problem. It's a problem not just in Connecticut, but frankly, nationally, we're seeing a shortage of applicants into the law enforcement field. So the committee is looking at several ways to streamline our process. One of the bills in particular that frankly is a little controversial, but I think would be helpful, is the committee has a bill to reclassify certain motor vehicle equipment violations. So be that one broken taillight or a window tint that's too dark as so-called secondary violations. So the police officers aren't charged or aren't out there trying to pull someone over for an equipment violation. And we can get police officers to focus on really what I believe they should be focused on, which is the reckless driving that we see all too often on our highways. Another issue that the committee has been grappling with is our bail system in Connecticut. I think most residents would be shocked to hear that we have an antiquated provision in our state constitution dating back to really the 1960s that says the only time anyone can be held in Connecticut without being, when they're charged with a crime, the only time they can be held without the ability to post bail is when they're charged with a capital offense, which is a death penalty eligible offense, which we no longer have in Connecticut law. So the way that plays out is under current Connecticut law, if someone is charged with rape, they are entitled to post bail. They're actually able to come up with the amount of money to post bail. They go out and they rape someone again. They can then be let out on bail a third time. And our current constitution allows that. And so we're pushing to get to voters an amendment to change our state constitution to prevent that type of thing and allow the legislature more authority to prescribe bail rules.
And bail reform is something you've been working on for a long time in the legislature. It's really a conversation that we've seen keep starting, but then get stalled. So, you talked about some of the concerns with the current bail formula and now this constitutional amendment. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that would change things and what kind of work or support does it have going into the last month of the session right now?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it remains a work in progress. I think what we're trying to do, and I always say, is I want to do bail reform right. I want to do it on a bipartisan basis. I want to do it with all the stakeholders at the table. Oftentimes, people hear bail reform and they're thinking of, maybe because of stories out of New York or other states, they think of it as something bad, something that is going to be detrimental to security in our state. And I don't see it that way at all. I see it as Connecticut really has been a national leader in showing that you can cut your prison population, which we have. We've cut our prison population in half over the last roughly 15 years, which has led to tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of savings for the state taxpayer. And at the same time, we've seen our violent crime rate decrease by 48% to where our violent crime rate in Connecticut is the third lowest in the country. So we have demonstrated that you can do criminal justice reform well, and you can do it to where it is going to save taxpayers money, it's going to cut down on the number of folks incarcerated, and it's going to lead to safer communities. And I think we can do that with bail reform as well. But it's a process, and I don't want to rush it through. I don't think we will get to a point where we get bail reform done in this short legislative session. It's probably not there yet, but I'll continue to press the conversation because the system we have simply is not the most effective one we could have, and we need to get all the stakeholders together to replace it at the right time.
Yeah, definitely a lot of big topics in such a short session, a lot to work on in not very many weeks. But, you know, one of the other things we were talking about related to police and law enforcement, as well as, you know, a lot of times when we've seen these discussions about law enforcement or laws related to police, is there's sometimes a block for lawmakers and bipartisanship when police reform or transparency proposals come up in your committee. People sometimes float this mutual exclusivity that police reform then means you're not supporting police. As co-chair of this committee, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's unfortunate. I really think that over the last, whatever it is, 5, 7 years, 8 years, policing has been politicized too much. And it's sort of, you either back the thin blue line or you don't. You know, when Connecticut passed its major police accountability reform in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, the vast majority of the provisions of that bill had bipartisan support. There were 3, maybe 4 provisions of what was a 50-page bill, frankly, that had where there was partisan disagreement over. You know, I don't think, you know, certainly Connecticut has not pushed any sort of defund the police type message. In fact, as we have worked to provide greater civilian oversight and regulation of police, which I think is certainly appropriate and is required in a democratic process like we have, we've invested more in policing. We've provided more grants. We've provided more funding for body cameras, for dashboard cameras, for police equipment. So I think sometimes, unfortunately, the headline becomes this party does this or this party does that. But I think if you really dig down deeper into it, the issue is more nuanced.
So with our last couple minutes here, something Connecticut, as well as many other states, have been running into lately is sort of this back and forth of passing a law, for example, abortion protections or gun control, and then seeing a federal law or court case attempt to dismantle it. So as the chair of this committee and someone who's led some of these gun laws that have been challenged in court for months at a time and who's studied and practices law, how has this impacted things on the Judiciary Committee?
Look, I mean, I will say, I think certainly, you know, the Dobbs decision gets a lot of the headlines recently in overturning Roe v. Wade, but I would put up there the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court a couple of years ago as just as, if not more dangerous to American lives. You know, we have seen an activist Supreme Court that has tried to redefine what really is, and really it's interesting when you juxtapose it with the Dobbs decision that the Supreme Court seems to be for states' rights in one place, but not for states' rights in the other place. And I think certainly it is well within the state's power, and frankly, it's within our responsibility to regulate gun ownership and gun access here in the state of Connecticut. I think we have shown through our criminal justice reform and through passage of stricter gun laws that we are a safer state. We keep our citizens safer as a result. And that really has led to what I talked about earlier, which is the real precipitous drop in violent crime that we've seen in this state over the last 15 years.
Well, Representative Stafstrom, unfortunately, that's all the time we have left. Kind of, I feel like this legislative session, time seems to be going by really quickly, but so much coming out of the Judiciary Committee this session that we're following. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Appreciate your time, and I'll be back with you afterwards.
Well, there's still more to come here, though, on The Real Story. Faculty at UConn are asking the state for more supplemental funds before the session is up, while changes are already hitting campus, and they say a lot more is at stake for students. Well, the state says they shouldn't have planned on using temporary funding in the first place. We're breaking all that down in this budget back and forth next.